Hello. Um, I'm going to read you a piece I wrote some time ago, and it goes like this. What is professional responsibility? Could the term be repealed when the patients are incarcerated? Let us also keep in mind patients' rights. Do they actually exist? By the end of this essay, I will make you judge to the answer of these questions. The topic here is psychiatric, not medical. All evidence I've collected makes my topic ever more shunned by our society. Join me in keeping the faith that someday something will be done about this atrocity of which I am about to write. Many years ago, it became known to me that I would be needing psychotropic medications. But what I did not know is that I would also be going to prison several times in my lifetime. Naturally, in prison, one has the availability of medications to them. Inmates, too, readily see healthcare personnel. I cringe to use the word professionals when describing any healthcare worker inside a barbed wire fence, for I've been there and know exactly the quality of workers the females are getting. I had a cellmate who was bleeding from the anus, who was told she could only see a physician's assistant, not a doctor. To see a doctor, inmates had to leave the prison escorted by staff, and with very good valid reason. My cellmate did not trust the assistant. She refused an examination, therefore got to see no physician. This particular inmate was being transferred to Iowa soon and felt that she could get better care when she arrived there. She chose to wait. I realize the stigma which applies to prisoners. If you're paying taxes, the attitude usually is lock them up and throw away the key. End quote. But truthfully, folks, is this what Jesus would do? I can only speak for the state in which I live, but with the recent headlines about Miss Andrea Yates, who without a doubt needs psychiatric care, she would go without in this state of South Dakota. There is no such thing as therapy or mental health counseling behind the walls. And ordinary citizens cannot comprehend why criminals reoffend. The fact is simple. Inmates get no help while they are on the inside. Oh, and pills, medications, those are easy. Criminals can be treated. But is this treatment the best medical care any inmate can receive? March 1996, Springfield State Prison, Springfield, South Dakota. While serving my term, short compared to others, I met a lady named Carol. Carol was doing time for shooting her daughter, supposedly. The daughter lived, but Carol got a lot of time out of the deal. Carol was coherent, a little off, but fine nonetheless. Pat took medications just as I did. I feel that Pat had personal demons she was dealing with, even though her daughter had publicly acknowledged the whole incident had been an accident and her mother was not totally at fault. There I transpose the names Carol and Pat. A day came when I said to myself, since I'm not out on the streets taking all types of illegal drugs and I'm not drinking alcohol, I think I'll stop my prescription medications. So I did, simple as that. The prison doctor had no problem with my decision to do so. I didn't go crazy. As a matter of fact, I could lie down in the middle of the day and take a nap, which I'd never been able to do while taking pills. It was a surprise to me. Perhaps I did not need those pills after all. Carol, on the other hand, never stopped taking her medication. I did my year in 22 days, which, by the way, should have only been a few months. A few months turned into over a year because I didn't keep my nose clean. I'd done nothing all those months to better myself, nor prepare myself for work in society. I wasn't cured of alcoholism. My dysfunctionalism is still intact. My only option upon leaving was to return to my small hometown and live with my mother, whom I despise and can't see eye to eye with, until I could get my own place. I went to see my psych doctor and got back on my meds. I let the Social Security Department know I was back on the street so I could reinstate my disability checks. The date I signed the release papers from the prison was April Fool's Day of 1997. I left the co-ed prison in Springfield on April 4th. I was put back in a local jail on May 12th, 1999. I arrived at the new women's prison on August 13th, 1999. I'd spent several days in a county jail prior to reaching Pier, tying up loose ends of court cases. Women's prison, Pier, 1999. Pat wasn't the same person. No, she was not. Something new about Pat. Something was new about Pat, and the difference was not good. Likewise, the facility was not the same either. The prison was no longer co-ed, and the property was moved to the capital of South Dakota, far away from Springfield. It was now in Pierre. The women are now locked up with only women. That alone was a harsh realization for them. No longer were they buddying up with men each night on the rec yard, playing baseball or walking the track. Their beautiful chapel was gone as well. A once spacious college campus was now an ugly, four-walled concrete structure. Once again, I entered the prison facility taking medications prescribed by my doctor back home. These drugs were small dosages of Zoloft and Seroquel for my bipolar type schizoaffective disorder. No more than 100 milligrams each. I'd had the same doctor for well over 10 years. I trusted him like I trusted no one else in my life. My problem started when I forgot all about that trust and how important it was to keep that bond with my private doctor. It appears my mind went out to lunch that day. I was to be scheduled to meet with the prison psychiatrist. Disability is an ugly word. Couple it with mental illness. Couple it with mental illness and it's a double whammy. The nails in this coffin are prison. What I do not wish to glorify here are any healthcare professionals, but the treating physician met with me there at the prison. However, 15 years prior, beginning in August of 1984, that very same doctor was one of the treating physicians at the Canner Unit, a mental ward at the Human Services Center in South Dakota. This is how I first came to know him. The Human Services Center in Yankton is a huge mental health treatment facility. It was once a place which literally saved my life. For that I am grateful, although the memories are revolting. I began drinking as a teen with other teens and more often older people. I smoked pot also. I feel acceptance I often chose to purchase alcohol for many peers since I was able. The city lifeguard worked at the liquor store, and we were sleeping together. Loneliness and alcohol were running neck and neck as my very best friend. The rage I experienced on a daily basis at home had me denying everything about myself. My looks were the only thing I was sure of. From early on, I knew I wanted to be a print model and do television commercials. Still others called me conceited. I never knew why. I just scoffed at them and curled up my lip and thought they should exude so much confidence. A high school girlfriend kept calling me weekly, telling me, there are men, money, and jobs here. You're wasting your life away, out here, out there in South Dakota. After so many calls from her, I listened. I packed several bags and headed out to Mesa, Arizona. Somewhere I had heard that best friends don't stay that way forever. A day after I'd gotten there, my best friend's 15-year-old juvenile delinquent sister landed on her doorstep with a stolen car and her mother's checkbook. It was a huge case of bad timing. Plus, this friend of mine had a boyfriend um, who was a classic woman hater, and he hated me. He liked weak women, ones he could control, like my friend. Needless to say, I was out the door in about 10 days. I'd lost my best friend and knew almost no one when I took a job at a huge nightclub called Dooley's of Tempe in Tempe, Arizona. The fast lane caught up with me and bowled me over. Quickly the ball started rolling down a hill of self-destruction. My drug of choice became cocaine, always mixed with alcohol. It didn't take long before the drugs caused serious damage to my brain. I entered a couple of psychiatric wards for just a brief stay. I had a friend named William Arnold, Bill for short. He was with me when I had a severe psychotic breakdown. Bill stayed with me after an employer telephoned him asking him to come and get me, also saying that I no longer had work. In a psychotic state of mind, I recall signing away my last payroll check. The psychotic episode lasted for many days leading up to my admittance to the hospital in Yankton, South Dakota. I was in a world only I could view, completely psychotic. My deepest fantasies came to life. Johnny Carson was coming to pick me up in a limousine, and he'd be here shortly. Or better yet, Michael Jackson. They both loved me so. I sang and danced constantly among the patients and staff on the canner unit. I even told my doctor I was in love with him. He was attractive. His voice was sexy. And so was he. I stayed at the hospital and received treatment until the medicine began working. Then came a holiday, Thanksgiving. The doctor told me I could go enjoy the holiday with my family, but to return directly after. I recall wanting to go home and stay. I left the hospital AMA, against medical advice. As long as I took my medications, I should be all right. The medications were not right, though. My arms were stiff, unnatural. My appetite was great. I gained weight. I looked like a typical mental patient. I swallowed an overdose out of pity for myself and got sent back to the psychiatric hospital. These were not good years for me. It is in the past, and that's where I wish for it to stay. I did not have the same choices in care as I had in Springfield, where my meds are concerned. I did I did not find out until it was too late that I could not choose to quit my medications. The low dosages I was on could not save me from the harsh atmosphere of the women's prison. My psyche did its best to cope, but could not. I turned on my many faces and put up my fronts. I knew several of the women who were doing their time. Pat recognized me right away, and she yelled out, "Hey, Kotex." She, along with others, referred to me as a sanitary napkin. And big fat inmate, another big fat heavy inmate, greeted me in the same manner, trying to high-five me as I walked down the hallway. She yelled my name. I felt right at home. My anger began festering up. How could I have allowed myself to come back to this damn hell on earth? Women who enter what is commonly referred to as the system methodically are shuffled through a healthcare routine. They see a physician's assistant, never a doctor. Only, of course, if they give birth. They may see a dentist if deemed necessary, and they see a shrink undoubtedly immediately upon their admittance. These are the basic healthcare options available to prisoners. I'd never seen more women running around without teeth in my life. The dentist on the property does a very good job of extracting teeth, then fitting the inmates with a mouthful of teeth that look visibly not their own. Comments about the house shrink were, "He's a real pill pusher. If you want pills, no problem. He'll give you pills all right," and comments similar to these. The fact is, were several women incarcerated who truly did need to be medicated, since they were violent individuals, murderers and baby killers, women who had stabbed people, ladies who would strike out at you at the drop of a hat. But were a few pills going to keep them from striking out at you if they wanted to again? Thus the layout of the prison facility. Whose brainchild was this? It is supposed to be known to be what is known as a maximum security prison, and that is what it is. No one could hide or get out, from what I could see. It was basically a box or a square. There was a place for violent women, which was known as B block, a place for minimum security women they called C block, and a pod for trustees they called D block. While I was there, they had planned to construct a building on the outside which looked similar to an army barracks. In it, they planned to house trustees. Thus, D block would overflow outside the fence. The women trustees were in charge of building their new home, known as E unit. Lest I forget A block, the disgusting place I spent nearly 4 months in a psychotic state of mind on what the staff there called a medical hold. The doctor held me in A block until his prescribed medications did what they were supposed to be doing, according to him. I once admired the doctor. I once had to trust him with my life and with my mind. But when I came to serve a short sentence for writing bad checks and driving behind the wheel of a car, I never expected to be treated with malpractice and negligence by a doctor I once believed to be a lifesaver. The court-appointed attorney at the time, before I retired him, told me, "Karen, you shouldn't serve any more than 7 months max." And then the attorney assigned to me by Judge Warren Johnson told me, "You'll be out in 4 to 6 months if you do all you're told, treatment and such." Both attorneys were sadly mistaken. The prison psychiatrist created new plans for my stay. I did the full 2 years rather than minimum of 6 or 7 as I was told. And I firmly believe it was due to malpractice, and no one can convince me of anything other than that. The doctor himself knows that he did wrong. Do you remember Pat, the woman I said killed her own daughter, supposedly? She too has been treated with negligence by the same doctor. I received a letter from the prison and heard that Pat has been in A block, commonly referred to as the hole, for 6 months. I mentioned that Pat wasn't herself when I arrived at the hospital prison. Indeed, she had changed somehow. She had a strange new personality. She stood out more. She had become a spectacle. She mumbled to herself, and she didn't do this before, last I knew her. She'd fly off into rages like clockwork at the lieutenant, captain, and officers. They'd whisk her off to the hole where the nursing staff had others. And they took her to the hole and they injected her in the rear end with some type of drug. And the population of women within view could watch, and most of them always bent their necks and listened. All the while, it seemed Pat didn't bother anyone. She would only come out of a room to fill a cup full of water for her coffee, be it hot or cold. When it was time to eat, she would be waiting in line like all the rest. Pat would play Scrabble with certain inmates' cards and with me a time or two. And she'd associate only with a select few, yet carry on a clear conversation with hardly no one. Her mind appeared to be gone, scrambled. Her thoughts disassociated to the point of not being able to communicate intelligent lines of speech. I so badly wanted her to talk to me about her crime. What really happened when she was convicted of shooting her daughter? Why is she still incarcerated if it was an accident? Why has her mental state gotten worse since I last saw her in 1996? I asked Pat one day, "What has this doctor got you on?" And her reply was, "Paxil." Paxil was a drug I'd heard of. So I mentioned it to the psychiatrist when I went to see him, and I told him I would like to be on Paxil. He replied to me, "We have no Paxil here." It was my turn to see a psychiatrist. I had no idea I was about to see a familiar face. I entered the room. To my right in a chair was Nurse Greenhagen, and sitting behind a desk was the famous psychiatrist from 1984. We made small talk about the good old days at Yankton Human Services Center. He questioned me about the circumstances which brought me to prison and about other personal issues. I gave him many details of my personal life. He appeared to soak it all in and take notes. The nurse sat calmly and listened too. I hated the fact that the nurse was there in the room with us. I wanted what I said to remain private between just me and the doctor. I felt violated. But this is what I get for being a criminal. My life is not my own anymore in this type of setting. I advised the prison psychiatrist of my medications. I told him that my doctor is a physician in my hometown where I was living, and I see him on a regular basis. But the prison psychiatrist asked me, what is your diagnosis? My mind went blank. What is my diagnosis? I had to think. I could not think of a diagnosis. So I just said the first thing that came to my mind. The last time I sat with my doctor, he told me one thing. I have severe mood swings. The prison doctor looked at me through his granny glasses, looked down at his medical notepad, jotted something down, looked at the nurse and looked back at me and asked me further, "How are you feeling, Karen?" "I'm angry," I said meekly. "What are you angry about, Karen?" "I'm pissed off that I'm in this fricking place." Seemingly put off by my language, the doctor made more notes. He calmly went on with the conversation. "How do you think we can help you, Karen?" Well, puzzled, I didn't know how to answer that type of direct question, and he went on. How long do you have to be here in this prison facility?" "What is your crime, Karen?" he continued. I said I wrote a few bad checks and I drove drunk. I put it bluntly. "Drove drunk, Karen, that is pretty serious. Do you know this?" "How many times have you drove drunk?" asked the psychiatrist. "Well, altogether about 6 times. I've been locked up 2 times now in Springfield and now here." "Are you going to stop doing this now, Karen?" "We'll see," I replied. "Yes, Karen, we'll see," was his reply to my reply of "we'll see." "Well, do you want any help from me today?" "Any help with your medication?" I said sharply, "Like what?" "Well, you seem rather impulsive." He observed that I was defensive. "Karen, I could give you something for that. Help you relax a bit. You say you're angry? This is not good. I could give you something for that." "All right, whatever you think," I replied curtly. Trust. Just because this man aided me before was no reason to give him carte blanche again to prescribe for me his way. Why did I do it? Why did I trust him? It is something I regret and wish I could erase. However, if I could do something today to change the way things operate in that facility, it would all be worth it. If I could do something to save Pat. But how? Malpractice is a serious offense. Negligence is too hard to prove in a court of law when it deals with psychiatric matters. In dealing with state-related issues, a citizen has just 180 days to bring forth a claim against a plaintiff for such charges. The doctor knew this very well. He knew the rules of the game, and he made them as difficult for me to play as he could possibly do. My 180 days were up. There were also no lawyers willing to take my case. Not even the famed attorney Jerry Spence was interested in the cause. I figured nobody inside the state of South Dakota would touch the case for fear of persecution from Governor William Janklow. I spoke to a local attorney, and he told me it was a no-win situation. He said, "You're looking for a yes lawyer, and they just don't exist. No one will touch this case, Karen." I called every lawyer in the Yellow Pages claiming to take malpractice cases. They all heard me out. Yet in the end, turned down the case. I even wrote to the American Civil Liberties Union in Fargo. Their chairwoman did not return my letters or telephone me back on any of my requests to speak with her regarding the issue. In the state earlier, there was a young girl who was killed while jogging on a forest road at a juvenile training camp in Plankington, South Dakota. We all remember the case. It was written up in the paper. Her parents sued the state for what they could claiming the officers ignored their daughter's pleas to quit, saying she was tired and could not continue. She collapsed of heat exhaustion and died on the spot. The case made national news. However, the people at fault in the matter did not receive proper punishment, and the governor dismissed it all as a terrible mishap, protecting and defending his state workers. My out date, the date in which I was supposed to leave the prison, was March 3rd, 2000. If I had done everything I was supposed to do, which was simply enter the prison, attend a treatment program for substance abuse, work a little bit, and get along well in population, I would have been able to leave on that date. Things did not work out as such. Before I could get to March 3rd, I had seen the prison psychiatrist, and he had prescribed medications, and I started taking them. The drugs were in my system. All I remember is being in cell block B. Remember the pod which houses violent criminals? Don't ask me why I was in there. I was in there with a lady guilty of stabbing her sister and another inmate, the three of us. Those two women were on what is referred to as room restriction. This means they cannot leave their room for any reason except to use the shower and to go to chow. I was lying on my bunk when I had an upheaval of uncontrollable emotion, so strong that I could not stop. It overtook me. I was in tears. I imagine my roommates were shocked. They probably summoned the police. Slang for called the officers is what they did. I had no idea what I was crying about. All I know is that I was sobbing to beat hell, and I could not quit. My mind went blank. Pieces of this experience I can't recall, only seconds of it. And as I'm reading this, I can't recall it at all. How I was, how I cried, how I appeared to my cellmates. I had just moved into this room with these two gals. The previous night we had laughed together and kept the whole pod up. I appeared to be normal. My cellies probably thought I was mad. Likewise, when this happened to me, immediately I made some enemies. I became a leper. They'd never seen someone acting so ungodly strange before in their lives. Others had no compassion. The guards rushed into the room and accosted me as if I had just committed a horrifying act. I was escorted to the hole. In A block, I was disrobed, first as usual, clothed in an orange jumpsuit, then placed in a hard cell. I recalled the sergeant look at me in disgust and say, "She is faking it." Then abruptly slamming the door. Inside, I was flailing around like a fish out of water, crying out to see the doctor and saying, "I need lithium." Why? Because this is the drug the doctor prescribed me back in the 80s at the Human Services Center. The drug which cured me so many years ago. The drug he gave me in liquid form night after night until my mind came back to me. I was once again at this doctor's mercy. The psychosis rapidly got worse. All of the events, people, and all the memories. All the pain. I was that child once again. I began dancing in my cell, singing at the top of my lungs. The cell block echoed like a chamber. All the other women housed inside A block could hear me making a fool of myself, and the cell block was full. The cell block was for women just entering the prison facility and for women who broke the rules of the system. My mind was a drug-induced mess, centered on hallucinations and grandiose thoughts. Looking back, I was a spectacle of the greatest magnitude for all the world to see. Only girls from my county knew the real me. They knew I was not crazy. Why did that doctor have to mess with my mind? Why did he feel it was necessary to give me 800 milligrams of Tegretol and raise my Seroquel sixfold, plus increase my intake of Zoloft? Then, following my psychiatric breakdown, think it was necessary to add trazodone and Haldol. These two drugs alone turned me into a doped-up zombie inside that freezing cold hard cell. What scared me the worst was I discovered that directly after the psychosis occurred, the doctor went to China for 7 full months. 7 full weeks he went out of town. And I was left for all that time to be under the care of prison staff. Far gone was my automatic out date of March 3rd, 2000. What's really up, as the saying goes, with professional responsibility in our prison settings, such as the one right here in Pierre, South Dakota? What is happening to my old friend, Pat? Is she a victim of that system's healthcare team? She's a guinea pig, Pat herself would say. What is the term patient's rights? What can it mean when at one facility I could take it upon myself to quit my meds, and then at another be told I must take them? I had no choice. Repeatedly I'd ask the prison doctor, "Doctor, I don't want to take these meds. Not this Tegretol any longer." He replied, "As long as you are in here, you will take this medication, Karen." He too said I couldn't quit these meds cold turkey. Yet the very same day I saw my doctor back home, he told me to stop taking all of the drugs from the prison psychiatrists. He then gave me new prescriptions and new dosages. I truly believe I did have a right to quit the medications the prison doctor had me on at the women's prison. The consequence for taking those pills was psychosis and segregation in A block for weeks on end. For Pat, it's the same continuing cycle of going to the hole, getting out, and going back in. My day for exiting the prison was nearing. I never thought the day would come. The prison doctor seemed a little too anxious about my plans for leaving. I went to see him a couple of weeks before I was due to leave. He had many questions for me. Where are you going? What are you going to do? I suppose one of the first things you're going to do is get a job. To that question, I told him he was out of his rabbit-ass mind. If he thought that the first thing I was going to do is get a job when I haven't seen my family in 2 whole years. How will you support yourself? Who will support you? How will you get to your destination? Will you keep taking your pills? The questions were endless. Then the comment came from him that really threw me for a loop. But I tried to show no outward fear. He said to me, you know, you may end up going someplace where you really don't want to go. I looked directly at him, looked down at my lap, somewhat nervously glanced at the nurse, and shook it off as what it was, an idle threat. Was he referring to commitment to asylum again? Yes, indeed he was. And with that, the office visit was pretty much over. He told me he wanted to see me one last time before I leave. Immediately, I thought this was strange. I was leaving the prison without any obligations to the Department of Corrections. I missed out on 2 years of my family's life. I was ready for home. Freedom was the only thing on my mind. Still to this day, I cannot stop thinking about Pat. Is she receiving the best mental care which she deserves? Who's to decide? The system dealt Pat her deck, dealt her deck as far as punishment is concerned. I feel, and need I remind you, I've been there. Pat is suffering. There is no communication between patients and their care providers. It's a one-way street. Think of patients' rights and professional responsibility. Those 2 little catchphrases. What do they truly stand for in the medical world? Or to anybody? Only God Almighty is looking out for my dear friend. She is certainly not in good hands with the prison staff.